Before he became the wealthiest man in history, John Davison Rockefeller was a boy growing up in modest circumstances in Richford, New York, born on July 8, 1839. His father, William Big Bill Rockefeller, was a charismatic but unscrupulous man, a peddler of miracle cures and a skilled con artist. Known as Devil Bill, he abandoned his family for long stretches, chasing schemes and indulging in a secret double life with another wife and family. Bill's actions left an indelible mark on young John. He learned early that trust was a rare commodity and survival required cunning. In contrast to his father's erratic behavior, Rockefeller's mother, Eliza, was devoutly religious and deeply principled. She instilled in her son the values of hard work, thrift, and an unwavering belief in divine providence. Yet, even as a child, Rockefeller saw an opportunity in commerce. He once remarked, "From the beginning, I was always money-minded." By the age of 7, he had already begun lending small sums to neighbors at interest, creating what would become his first bank. The Rockefeller family moved frequently due to Big Bill's schemes, eventually settling in Cleveland, Ohio. At 16, John landed his first real job as a bookkeeper at Hewitt & Tuttle, a produce shipping firm. Earning 50 cents a day, he meticulously recorded every cent he spent and saved. Rockefeller found immense satisfaction in balancing accounts, organizing shipments, and negotiating payments, a skill set that would serve him well in the chaotic oil industry to come. Rockefeller's discipline bordered on obsession. His peers noted his focus, even-tempered demeanor, and an unshakable confidence in his abilities. Yet behind the quiet exterior was a deep hunger for success, driven by a determination to escape the instability of his father's shadow and the mediocrity of a working-class life. He dreamed of creating something permanent, something unassailable. As he later put it, "I always tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity." As he grew into adulthood, Rockefeller's relentless focus on efficiency and order would set him apart. Where others saw chaos in the booming oil rush of the 1860s, Rockefeller saw opportunity, a chance to impose discipline on an industry and profit in a way that no one had imagined. Little did the world know this quiet bookkeeper would soon reshape not only the oil industry, but the very foundations of capitalism. The American oil industry was born in 1859 when Edwin Drake struck oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania. The discovery ignited a frenzy, a chaotic gold rush that lured wildcatters and speculators. Crude oil was abundant, but the industry was unorganized, rife with inefficiency and waste. It was in this environment that John D. Rockefeller saw not chaos, but opportunity. He knew oil could power the future, if someone could bring order to the madness. In 1863, Rockefeller made his first foray into oil by partnering with businessman Maurice Clark to establish a small refinery in Cleveland. At just 24 years old, Rockefeller was already demonstrating his uncanny ability to spot opportunity and mitigate risk. Unlike the wildcatters chasing oil strikes, Rockefeller focused on refining, a more predictable and lucrative part of the supply chain. His refinery quickly became one of the most efficient in the area, thanks to Rockefeller's obsession with precision and cost control. But success brought tension. By 1865, disputes with Maurice Clark came to a head. Rockefeller, unwilling to compromise, made a bold move. He offered to buy out Clark's share in the business. The two men agreed to settle the matter through an auction. With nerves of steel, Rockefeller bid $72,500, an enormous sum at the time, and walked away with complete control of the refinery. Years later, Rockefeller would recall this moment as the pivotal turning point in his career, saying, "It was the day I determined my future." Now the sole owner, Rockefeller wasted no time scaling his operations. He poured resources into improving efficiency, reducing waste, and expanding his reach. He invested in infrastructure, building storage facilities, improving transportation routes, and cutting deals with suppliers. By 1867, he had partnered with chemist Samuel Andrews, who introduced innovative refining methods, and Henry Flagler, a visionary strategist who helped Rockefeller secure funding and expand. This focus on infrastructure and efficiency became the cornerstone of Rockefeller's business philosophy. He didn't just refine oil, he revolutionized the way it was produced, stored, and transported. His ambition, however, was not just to succeed, but to dominate. Rockefeller wasn't content with refining oil. He wanted to control the entire industry, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve it. By the early 1870s, the oil industry was booming, but it was also a battlefield. Dozens of independent refiners were vying for a share of the market, and prices fluctuated wildly. For John D. Rockefeller, this chaos was an opportunity. To him, competition wasn't a driver of innovation, it was an inefficiency to be eliminated. His goal was simple: to dominate the oil industry entirely. In 1872, Rockefeller launched what would later be called the Cleveland Massacre, a ruthless campaign to consolidate the refining industry. At the time, Cleveland was the epicenter of oil refining, with 26 independent refineries competing for business. Rockefeller, through Standard Oil, systematically approached each one with an offer: sell your refinery to Standard Oil at a fair price, or prepare to be driven into bankruptcy. For many, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. Rockefeller didn't rely on persuasion alone. Behind the scenes, he used secret deals and pressure tactics to make resistance futile. Through his exclusive partnerships with major railroads, Standard Oil enjoyed significant shipping rebates, allowing him to transport oil at a fraction of the cost his competitors faced. This gave him a massive pricing advantage. Even worse, Rockefeller negotiated drawbacks, a sinister arrangement where railroads paid Standard Oil a cut of the shipping fees charged to rival refiners. Every barrel of oil transported by a competitor indirectly enriched Rockefeller. Within just a few months, Rockefeller had acquired 22 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. Those who resisted saw their businesses crumble under the weight of Standard Oil's predatory pricing and logistical dominance. Rockefeller later justified his actions, claiming, "It was a survival of the fittest, and we believed we were the fittest." But for the independent refiners and workers left behind, his methods were nothing short of brutal. The Cleveland Massacre wasn't just a local phenomenon, it was a blueprint for how Rockefeller would approach the oil industry nationwide. He didn't just want to be the biggest refiner, he wanted to control every aspect of the oil supply chain. From extraction to transportation to retail, Rockefeller sought to create an unassailable monopoly, leaving no room for rivals to survive. By the late 1870s, John D. Rockefeller was no longer just a refinery owner, he was an empire builder. His vision for Standard Oil extended far beyond Cleveland, encompassing every facet of the oil industry. To achieve this, Rockefeller needed to solve a critical problem: transportation. Crude oil and kerosene needed to reach distant markets, and railroads were the arteries of America's economy. But in this logistical web, Rockefeller saw not just a solution but an opportunity for total domination. Rockefeller approached major railroads like the Pennsylvania Erie and New York Central lines with a bold proposition. Standard Oil would guarantee them a steady stream of business in exchange for heavily discounted shipping rates, known as rebates. These rebates gave Rockefeller a significant cost advantage over his rivals, allowing him to transport oil at a fraction of the price others paid. But Rockefeller didn't stop there. He introduced a second layer to the deal: drawbacks. Under the drawback system, the railroads agreed to pay Rockefeller a portion of the shipping fees they collected from his competitors. In other words, every time a rival shipped oil, they were unknowingly enriching Standard Oil. This scheme crippled Rockefeller's competition, forcing many smaller refiners into financial ruin. As one critic put it, "He had us coming and going." These secret deals solidified Rockefeller's stranglehold on the industry, as his competitors simply couldn't match his artificially low costs. The impact was devastating. Independent refiners couldn't compete with Standard Oil's prices and were forced to either sell their operations to Rockefeller or face bankruptcy. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled 90% of the refining industry in the United States. Rockefeller's genius lay not just in securing these deals, but in concealing them. The public and even some of his closest business partners were unaware of the extent of his manipulation. But railroads weren't Rockefeller's endgame. They were merely a stepping stone. By the 1880s, he had begun investing in his own pipelines to bypass railroads entirely, further consolidating his power. His vision was not just to dominate refining, but to control the entire supply chain, from the oil fields to the kerosene lamps of American homes. By the early 1880s, John D. Rockefeller had achieved what many thought impossible. Standard Oil didn't just control Cleveland, it controlled the entire oil industry in the United States. Through calculated mergers, acquisitions, and the power of his railroad deals, Rockefeller had amassed nearly total control over refining, pipelines, and distribution. But his ruthless consolidation of power was far from over. In 1882, Rockefeller took his next monumental step. He consolidated his empire into a single corporate structure, creating the Standard Oil Trust. This was an ingenious move. Under the trust system, he could maintain control of dozens of companies, each technically independent, but governed by his decisions. It allowed him to evade state laws and avoid the increasing scrutiny of the public and government. Rockefeller was no longer just a businessman. He was now the architect of an industrial behemoth that dominated the American economy. As Standard Oil's dominance grew, so did the public's ire. Newspapers began calling him a robber baron, accusing him of exploiting workers, stifling innovation, and manipulating the market for his own gain. The public saw Rockefeller as the embodiment of corporate greed, an industrial titan who crushed anyone who stood in his way. Critics pointed to his cutthroat business tactics, his virtual monopoly, and his ability to bribe politicians to keep his empire untouchable. Even as these accusations mounted, Rockefeller's public persona remained that of a shrewd, calculating businessman. He skillfully manipulated his image as a philanthropist, donating millions to causes like education, public health, and scientific research. Yet behind this facade, Rockefeller's reputation as an unyielding businessman remained firmly intact. His critics branded him as the symbol of corporate corruption, while his defenders hailed him as a genius who brought efficiency and innovation to an industry on the brink of collapse. To Rockefeller, the public's perception didn't matter. He viewed his actions as necessary for the progress of the American economy. The nation's growth, in his eyes, was inseparable from the rise of Standard Oil. His strategy was always clear: build something so dominant, so essential that nothing, no law, no rival, no amount of public outrage, could threaten it. By the 1890s, John D. Rockefeller's reign over the oil industry was becoming synonymous with corporate tyranny. Standard Oil's dominance had grown so extensive, it controlled 90% of the nation's oil refineries, pipelines, and distribution networks. But as Rockefeller's empire reached its pinnacle, a new and unexpected force emerged, one that would threaten to unravel everything he had worked for. The rise of monopolies like Standard Oil prompted growing public concern. The idea of a single corporation wielding such power was frightening to many. Journalists, politicians, and reformers began to speak out, urging the government to take action. The term robber baron was coined to describe men like Rockefeller, who were perceived as using unfair tactics to crush competition and amass wealth. By the mid-1890s, the cries for reform were deafening, and the government could no longer ignore the mounting calls for action. In 1890, the U.S. Congress responded by passing the Sherman Antitrust Act, a groundbreaking piece of legislation designed to prevent anti-competitive practices and monopolies. The act made it illegal to restrain trade or commerce, and it gave the federal government the power to break up companies that had become too powerful. For Rockefeller and Standard Oil, it marked the beginning of a long and arduous battle. In 1906, the government filed suit against Standard Oil, accusing it of violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. The case went to court in 1911, with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that Standard Oil was indeed a monopoly, and ordering its dissolution. The court determined that the company's practices were anti-competitive, and its methods of control over transportation and distribution were unlawful. The decision sent shockwaves through the business world. Standard Oil was ordered to be broken up into 34 smaller companies, including what would later become some of the largest oil companies in the world: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others. For Rockefeller, this was a bitter pill to swallow. Though his fortune had been built on ruthless consolidation, the breakup of Standard Oil was a monumental blow to his empire. But in true Rockefeller fashion, he took the hit in stride. Even after the dissolution, Rockefeller's wealth remained staggering. He was still one of the richest men in the world, but his empire was forever fractured. In many ways, the breakup of Standard Oil marked the end of an era, the rise and fall of an industrial titan who had reshaped an entire industry. But as history has shown, his influence would not be easily erased. The dissolution of Standard Oil in 1911 marked the fall of a monopoly that had once controlled nearly every aspect of the American oil industry. But for John D. Rockefeller, this defeat was not the end. Far from it. Though his empire had been broken apart by the courts, the wealth he accumulated remained staggering, and his influence over the industry, though fractured, was still profound. In the years following the breakup, Rockefeller redirected his focus from business to philanthropy, pouring his immense fortune into causes that would shape the world long after his industrial reign had ended. He donated millions to education, public health, and scientific research, establishing institutions like the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Foundation. His legacy was no longer just about oil, it was about shaping the future of society. Yet even as he gave away much of his wealth, Rockefeller remained a deeply controversial figure. To some, he was a robber baron, a man who built his fortune on the backs of workers and through ruthless monopolistic tactics. To others, he was a genius who revolutionized an industry and whose philanthropic efforts would change the world for the better. Rockefeller's story is one of ambition, power, and contradictions. He was a man whose drive shaped industries and whose methods remain a topic of intense debate. But one thing is certain, his legacy is undeniable. The industries he built, the foundations he funded, and the very notion of corporate power were all irrevocably transformed by his actions. John D. Rockefeller's story may have ended with the breakup of Standard Oil, but his impact on business philanthropy and American society continues to echo through history. From humble beginnings to the pinnacle of industrial power, His journey was one of relentless drive and uncompromising vision, proof that in the world of business, nothing is ever truly permanent. As the world changed around him, one question remained. Would his legacy be remembered as one of unparalleled achievement or the embodiment of unchecked corporate greed? John D. Rockefeller, the man who changed America.